The gunshot echoed across the Texas plains as Hannah Evans watched her husband fall, his body crumpling to the ground like a rag doll tossed aside by a careless child. It was 1876 in Fort Stockton, Texas, and in that single moment, her world shattered into 1,000 pieces that no amount of tears could ever piece back together. "Thomas," she screamed, running to him, her skirts catching on the dry brush. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the parched earth crimson. His eyes, once vibrant with life, stared vacantly at the endless blue sky above. Hannah clutched his lifeless form to her chest, her sobs carrying on the hot wind, but no one was there to hear her anguish. The bandits who had ambushed them on their journey back from San Antonio had taken everything: their wagon, their supplies, the money Thomas had earned from selling their cattle. But they had taken something far more precious, too. In the chaos of the attack, her 6-year-old son, Michael, had disappeared. "Michael," Hannah called out frantically, her voice hoarse. "Michael, where are you?" Only silence answered her desperate pleas. For 3 days, Hannah searched the surrounding area, her feet bloody and blistered inside her worn boots. She dug a shallow grave for Thomas with her bare hands, marking it with rocks and wildflowers, promising to return with a proper headstone someday. But her son, she refused to believe he was gone too. On the 4th day, she collapsed by the Pecos River, her strength finally giving out. The gentle rushing of the water matched the flow of her tears as she wept for her lost child. Her golden brown hair hung in dirty tangles around her face, and her once pretty blue dress was now torn and stained with dust and her husband's dried blood. "Madam," Hannah didn't look up at first, thinking the voice was just another cruel trick of her exhausted mind. "Madam, are you hurt?" This time, she raised her head to see a man on horseback, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Behind him rode a young boy, no more than 10 years old. "My son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They took my son." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching her cautiously as one might a wounded animal. "I'm Nathan Garrett," he said, his voice low and gentle. "This is my boy, Samuel." The boy slid down from his horse, looking at Hannah with wide, curious eyes. "You're from Fort Stockton?" Nathan asked, crouching beside her. Hannah nodded weakly. We were returning from San Antonio. Bandits attacked us. They killed my husband and took my son, Michael." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "He's only 6, he must be so scared." Nathan's face hardened, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent under the Texas sky. His dark hair was partly hidden beneath a worn cowboy hat, and his eyes, a deep shade of green, held a kindness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Samuel," he called to his son, "bring the water canteen for Mrs. Evans," Hannah supplied. "Hannah Evans." The boy approached, holding out the canteen. Hannah took it with trembling hands. "He's playing with Mama in heaven," Samuel said suddenly, his voice small but certain. Hannah looked at the boy in confusion, the water halfway to her lips. "Your boy," Samuel continued. "He's playing with my Mama in heaven. That's what Pa told me when Mama died. She watches over me from up there." He pointed at the sky, which was beginning to darken with twilight. Hannah's heart constricted painfully in her chest. "No," she whispered. "No, Michael isn't dead. He can't be." Nathan placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Samuel, why don't you check on the horses?" He waited until the boy had moved away before turning back to Hannah. "Mrs. Evans, I'm sorry for my son's words. He lost his mother 2 years ago, and it's his way of understanding loss." "But my son isn't lost that way," Hannah insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. "He's been taken, I know it." Nathan studied her face, seeming to measure her conviction. After a moment, he nodded. "Then we'll find him." "We." Hannah echoed, hope flickering in her chest for the first time in days. "My ranch is just outside Fort Stockton. I know these lands better than most, and I've tracked men before. If your boy is out there, we'll bring him home." Hannah stared at this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes and a determined set to his jaw. She had nothing left to lose by trusting him. "Why would you help me?" Nathan's gaze drifted to his son, who was now feeding an apple to his horse. Because no child should be separated from their parent, and no parent should have to endure what you're going through. He turned back to her. Can you ride? Hannah nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Yes. Then we'll head to my ranch tonight. You need rest, food, and clean clothes. Tomorrow at first light, we'll start tracking these bandits. For the first time in days, Hannah felt a glimmer of hope. The Garrett ranch was modest but well kept, with a main house built of sturdy logs and a large barn that housed several horses. As they approached, Hannah could see lantern light glowing in the windows, casting a warm welcome into the gathering darkness. Mrs. Cooper looks after Samuel when I'm away, Nathan explained as they dismounted. She's probably fixed supper by now. As if on cue, the door opened, and an older woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Nathan Garrett, you're late, she called, her tone scolding but affectionate. Then she spotted Hannah. Oh, dear Lord, what happened to this poor woman? This is Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Cooper. She's lost her husband and son to bandits. She'll be staying with us tonight. Mrs. Cooper's expression softened immediately. Come in, dear. You look half dead on your feet. The inside of the house was warm and inviting, with simple but comfortable furnishings. A large pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with a rich, savory aroma that made Hannah's empty stomach growl audibly. First, a hot bath for you, Mrs. Cooper declared, already heading toward a back room. And I'll find you some clean clothes. Nathan, serve up that stew. The poor woman's starving. Hannah wanted to protest that she wasn't hungry, that they needed to start searching for Michael right away, but her body betrayed her as her knees buckled beneath her. Nathan caught her before she hit the floor. Easy now, he murmured, helping her to a chair. You won't be any good to your son if you collapse from exhaustion. The logic of his words penetrated her foggy mind, and she nodded weakly. Later, after a hot bath that washed away days of grime and tears, Hannah sat at the kitchen table dressed in a simple blue dress that Mrs. Cooper had provided. It was a bit loose on her slender frame, but clean and whole. She ate her stew mechanically, her mind still filled with images of Michael's frightened face. Can you tell us what happened, Mrs. Evans? Nathan asked gently, once she'd eaten enough to regain some color in her cheeks. Hannah set down her spoon, her hands still trembling slightly. My husband Thomas and I owned a small cattle ranch about 10 miles east of Fort Stockton. We traveled to San Antonio to sell some cattle. It was our first good year, and Thomas was so proud. Her voice caught on her late husband's name. On the way back, just a day's ride from home, we were ambushed. 3 men, maybe 4. It happened so fast. She closed her eyes, the memories washing over her. Thomas told Michael to hide in the back of the wagon, under the canvas. He tried to reason with them, offered them our money if they'd just let us go. But they shot him anyway. Just shot him right in the chest without a word. Samuel, who had been quiet until then, looked up from his stew, his eyes wide. Mrs. Cooper placed a protective hand on his shoulder but didn't send him away. I screamed, and that's when they noticed me. One of them grabbed me, but I fought back. I scratched his face. He had a beard, dark red. He slapped me hard enough to knock me to the ground. I think I blacked out for a moment. When I came to, they were gone. The wagon, our supplies, everything gone. Hannah opened her eyes, fixing them on Nathan's face. And Michael was gone too. At first I thought maybe he'd run away to hide, but I called and searched for hours. There was no sign of him. Did you see where they headed? Nathan asked, his voice taking on a harder edge. Hannah shook her head. West, I think, but I can't be sure. I was so disoriented. And this was 4 days ago. Yes. I buried Thomas and then started searching. I've been walking ever since, calling for Michael. That's when you found me by the river. Nathan exchanged a glance with Mrs. Cooper. If they headed west, they might be aiming for Mexico. But with a wagon, they won't be moving fast. You think they took Michael deliberately? Mrs. Cooper asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Nathan's expression darkened. There are men who'd sell a child to the highest bidder, especially in Mexico. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, a fresh wave of horror washing over her. Oh God, no. We don't know that's what happened, Nathan said quickly, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. But we need to move fast. I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow, gather some men. A child can't just disappear without someone seeing something. I'm coming with you, Hannah stated firmly. Mrs. Evans, Hannah, she corrected him. If we're going to find my son together, you might as well use my name. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Respect, perhaps. Hannah, then. And I'm Nathan, but the town isn't a place for a lady who's just lost her husband. I buried my husband with my bare hands, and I've spent 4 days searching for my son alone in the wilderness. I think I can handle Fort Stockton. A small smile touched the corner of Nathan's mouth. All right, then, we'll leave at first light. Samuel will stay here with Mrs. Cooper. Samuel's face fell, but he didn't protest. Hannah suspected it was an argument he'd lost many times before. That night, lying in a borrowed nightgown on a soft bed in the Garrett's spare room, Hannah stared at the ceiling, sleep evading her despite her exhaustion. The events of the past few days played in her mind on an endless loop: Thomas's death, Michael's disappearance, the kindness of this stranger and his son. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called quietly. The door creaked open, and Samuel's small figure appeared in the doorway, a candle in his hand casting long shadows on the wall. "Samuel, is everything all right?" Hannah sat up, concerned. The boy approached the bed cautiously. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about your boy." Hannah's heart ached for this child who was burdened with thoughts no child should have to carry. "That's very kind of you. I didn't mean to make you sad before," Samuel said, his voice small, "when I said he was with my mama." "I know you didn't," Hannah assured him. "Your father explained." Samuel nodded, his serious eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Pa says we're gonna find him. Pa doesn't lie." Hannah felt a lump form in her throat. "I believe him," she said, surprised to find that she meant it. "My mama died of fever," Samuel continued, matter-of-factly. "I was 8. Pa says it's not fair, but sometimes life isn't fair. Your father sounds like a wise man." Samuel nodded solemnly. "He taught me to track animals. He can find anything. If anyone can find your boy, it's Pa." Hannah reached out, hesitantly touching the boy's hair. "Thank you, Samuel. That helps me feel better." The boy smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "G-night, Mrs. Evans." "Good night, Samuel." After the door closed behind him, Hannah lay back down, tears slipping silently from the corners of her eyes. But for the first time since the attack, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of hope. Morning came too quickly, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the curtains of the spare room. Hannah dressed in the clothes Mrs. Cooper had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that were more practical than her ruined dress. She braided her hair and pinned it up, trying to make herself presentable for town. When she emerged from her room, she found Nathan already at the kitchen table, dressed in a clean shirt with his gun belt strapped around his waist. He was drinking coffee and studying a map spread out before him. "Morning," he said, looking up as she entered. "Mrs. Cooper's left some breakfast for you." Hannah nodded her thanks, moving to the stove where a plate of biscuits and bacon was keeping warm. She wasn't hungry, but she knew she needed to keep her strength up. "I've been thinking about the bandits' likely route," Nathan said, as she sat down across from him with her plate and a cup of coffee. "If they were headed toward Mexico, they'd probably take the old trading route here." He traced a line on the map with his finger. "It's less traveled these days, which means fewer witnesses, but it's easier terrain for a wagon." Hannah leaned forward, studying the map. How long would it take them to reach the border? At a steady pace, with stops for rest, about 5 or 6 days. But they'd have to stop somewhere to resupply, especially if they have a child with them. Nathan's green eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. "That gives us time." "What if they don't have Michael?" Hannah voiced the fear that had been gnawing at her all night. "What if he ran away when the shooting started and he's lost out there somewhere?" Nathan considered this. "It's possible," he admitted. "But a 6-year-old boy alone in this territory, someone would have spotted him by now." The fact that no one's brought him into town suggests he's either with the bandits or... He trailed off, not wanting to voice the alternative. "Or he didn't survive," Hannah finished for him, her voice hollow. Nathan reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his. "I don't believe that. You said you didn't find any sign of him near the ambush site. That means he either ran far away or he was taken. And if he ran, like you said, someone would have found him by now." Hannah nodded, clinging to that logic. "So we focus on the bandits." "Yes." We'll start in town, ask questions. Someone might have seen them passing through or heard something. Samuel entered the kitchen then, still in his nightshirt, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Are you leaving already?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. Nathan's expression softened at the sight of his son. "Yes, but we'll be back tonight. Mind Mrs. Cooper while I'm gone." Samuel nodded, then turned to Hannah. "You'll find him," he said with the absolute certainty that only a child could muster. Hannah managed a small smile. "Thank you, Samuel." An hour later, Hannah and Nathan rode into Fort Stockton. The town was already bustling with activity merchants opening their stores, cowboys leading horses to the livery, women gossiping outside the general store. Hannah felt exposed under the curious stares they received as they made their way down the main street. "They're just not used to seeing a new face," Nathan explained, noticing her discomfort. "Especially one as pretty as yours." Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "Where do we start?" "Sheriff's office," Nathan replied, guiding his horse toward a small building with the town's star painted on the door. "Sheriff Miller is a good man. He'll help us organize a search party." The sheriff's office was cool and dim after the bright morning sunlight. A middle-aged man with a bushy mustache looked up from his desk as they entered. "Nathan," he greeted, standing. "What brings you into town?" His eyes shifted to Hannah, curious. "Sheriff Miller, this is Mrs. Hannah Evans," Nathan introduced her. Her husband was murdered and her son kidnapped by bandits 4 days ago, about a day's ride east of here. The sheriff's expression turned grave. "Madam, I'm sorry for your loss. Please sit down and tell me everything." Hannah recounted her story once more, her voice steadier than it had been the night before. Sheriff Miller listened attentively, occasionally jotting notes on a piece of paper. "A man with a red beard," he repeated when she finished. "That could be Jim Regan. He and his brother have been causing trouble around these parts for months. Robbery mostly, but murder isn't beyond them." Hope surged in Hannah's chest. "Do you know where they might be headed?" "They've got a hideout somewhere in the hills, but we've never been able to pinpoint its location." The sheriff scratched his chin thoughtfully. "But if they took your wagon and supplies, they might be planning something bigger, possibly heading for Mexico like Nathan suggested." "Can you help us organize a search party?" Nathan asked. Sheriff Miller nodded. "I'll round up some men. We can be ready to ride out by noon." "Thank you," Hannah said fervently. "In the meantime," the sheriff continued, "you might want to check with Bill Jenkins over at the livery. He hears things, and if anyone unusual came through town recently, he'd know." They left the sheriff's office with renewed purpose, heading toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The livery owner, a thin man with oil-stained hands, was shoeing a horse when they arrived. "Bill," Nathan called, dismounting and helping Hannah down from her horse. "Got a minute?" Bill looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Nathan Garrett, haven't seen you in town for a while." "Been busy at the ranch," Nathan replied. "This is Mrs. Evans. She's looking for some information about bandits that might have passed through town in the last few days." Red-bearded man, possibly traveling with a young boy. Bill's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Can't say I've seen any bandits, but there was a group came through 2 days ago that seemed in a hurry. 3 men driving a wagon that looked too fine for their type." Hannah's heart raced. "Did they have a boy with them? 6 years old, blonde hair?" Bill shook his head slowly. "Didn't see no boy. But they stopped just long enough to water their horses and buy some supplies from the general store, paid with gold, which raised some eyebrows. Folks around here mostly use paper money or barter." "Which way were they headed?" Nathan asked. "West, toward the old Ferguson place. It's been abandoned for years, but it's a known spot for those looking to lie low for a while." Nathan and Hannah exchanged a glance. "How far is it?" Hannah asked. "About half a day's ride from here. But Mrs. Evans, if these are the men who killed your husband, you shouldn't. I'm going," Hannah stated firmly, her blue eyes flashing with determination. Bill looked to Nathan, who simply nodded. "She's coming with us." They returned to the sheriff's office to share what they'd learned. By noon, as promised, Sheriff Miller had assembled a group of 6 men, all armed and ready to ride. Nathan had borrowed a rifle from the sheriff for Hannah, though she admitted she wasn't much of a shot. "Stay close to me," he told her as they prepared to set out. "These men won't hesitate to shoot if cornered." Hannah nodded, her face set with determination. I just want my son back. The ride to the Ferguson place was tense and largely silent. Hannah's thoughts were consumed with images of Michael, his frightened face, his tears, his confusion at being taken from his parents. What had these men told him? Did he think she had abandoned him? The thought was almost too painful to bear. Nathan rode beside her, occasionally glancing her way with concern. "We're going to find him," he said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As they neared the abandoned Ferguson ranch, Sheriff Miller signaled for the group to stop and dismount. "We'll approach on foot from here," he said in a low voice. "If they're there, we don't want to announce our arrival." The men tied their horses to trees and checked their weapons. Nathan turned to Hannah. "Stay behind me," he instructed firmly. She wanted to argue, to insist that she should be the first to enter to find her son. But she knew that would be foolish. These men were trained, experienced. She would only put Michael in more danger if she rushed in blindly. "All right," she agreed. They moved through the trees silently, approaching a dilapidated wooden structure that had once been a proud ranch house. Smoke rose from the chimney, a clear sign that someone was inside. Sheriff Miller positioned his men around the building, gesturing for Nathan and Hannah to stay back. Hannah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. This was it. Michael might be just inside those walls, or they might find nothing, another dead end in her desperate search. Sheriff Miller gave the signal and the men burst through the door, guns raised. Hannah held her breath, straining to hear over the sudden commotion. A gunshot rang out, then another. A man's voice shouted in anger or pain, she couldn't tell which. And then, cutting through it all, a sound that made her heart stop. A child's frightened cry. "Michael," she gasped, starting forward. Nathan caught her arm. "Wait," he urged. "Wait until it's clear." But Hannah couldn't wait, not with her son's cries echoing in her ears. She pulled away from Nathan and ran toward the house, ignoring his call for her to stop. She burst through the door to find the sheriff and his men subduing two rough-looking men. A third lay on the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. And there, in the corner, tied to a chair with tears streaming down his dirty face, was Michael. "Mama," he cried when he saw her. Hannah rushed to him, her own tears falling freely as she untied the ropes binding him to the chair. The moment he was free, Michael threw himself into her arms, his small body trembling with sobs. "Mama, I thought you were dead," he wept. "They said you and Papa were both dead." "No, my sweet boy," Hannah murmured, holding him tightly. "I'm here, I'm right here." Nathan appeared beside them, his gun still drawn. "Are you hurt, Michael?" he asked gently. Michael looked up at the stranger, sniffling. "My arms hurt from the ropes, and I'm hungry. They didn't give me much food." Nathan's jaw tightened, and he turned to the men being restrained by the sheriff's posse. One of them, a man with a fiery red beard, glared back defiantly. "You're lucky we're bringing you in alive," Nathan growled. Sheriff Miller approached, holstering his gun. "Mrs. Evans, is this your son?" Hannah nodded, unable to stop touching Michael's face, his hair, reassuring herself that he was real and alive. "Yes, this is Michael. And these are the men who attacked you and killed your husband." Hannah looked at the three bandits, her eyes lingering on the red-bearded man who had struck her during the attack. "Yes, that's them." "Then they'll hang for murder and kidnapping," the sheriff said grimly. "Let's get them back to town." The ride back to Fort Stockton was much lighter than the journey out. Michael rode with Hannah, nestled against her chest as she held the reins of her horse. He told her in broken sentences how the men had found him hiding in the wagon and taken him, how they'd talked about selling him to someone in Mexico, how they'd told him his parents were dead to make him stop crying for them. "But I didn't believe them, not really," he said, his voice small but defiant. "I knew you'd come for me, Mama." Hannah kissed the top of his head, her heart so full it might burst. "Always, my brave boy, I will always come for you." Nathan rode beside them, occasionally offering Michael a reassuring smile. The boy had been wary of him at first, but had warmed to the cowboy during the journey back, especially after Nathan had shared some jerky from his saddlebag with the hungry child. They reached Fort Stockton as the sun was beginning to set, the sheriff and his men leading the bound bandits directly to the jail. Hannah, Michael, and Nathan stopped at the general store first, where Hannah used some money Nathan lent her to buy Michael new clothes and some sweets. "Nathan," Hannah said as they exited the store, Michael happily sucking on a candy stick, "I don't know how to thank you. Without your help, I might never have found Michael." Nathan shook his head, his expression soft as he watched the boy. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Hannah disagreed. "Not anyone. You took in a stranger, believed me when I said my son was alive, and helped me find him without a moment's hesitation. That's not something just anyone would do." A slight blush colored Nathan's weathered cheeks. "You're welcome to stay at the ranch until you figure out what to do next," he offered. "Samuel will be overjoyed to have another boy around." The mention of her ranch brought a fresh wave of grief to Hannah. How could she return there now without Thomas? How could she run it alone with a young son to care for? As if reading her thoughts, Nathan added gently, "And if you decide to stay in Fort Stockton permanently, I'm sure we could work something out regarding your ranch. I've been looking to expand my grazing land." It was a generous offer, one that gave her options where before she'd seen none. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd like to stay at your ranch for a few days, at least until Michael has recovered from his ordeal." Nathan nodded, seemingly pleased. "Good, Samuel will be waiting up for us, I'm sure." True to Nathan's prediction, Samuel was sitting on the porch when they arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Cooper standing behind him with a lantern. The boy jumped to his feet when he saw them approaching, his eyes widening at the sight of Michael. "You found him," Samuel exclaimed as they dismounted. Michael, suddenly shy, pressed against Hannah's skirts. "Michael," Hannah said gently, "this is Samuel, and that's Mrs. Cooper. They've been very kind to me while I was looking for you." Mrs. Cooper approached, her face wreathed in smiles. "You must be hungry, young man. I've got a stew keeping warm, and there's apple pie for dessert." At the mention of pie, Michael's shyness disappeared. "Apple pie," he repeated, his eyes lighting up. Samuel grinned. "Mrs. Cooper makes the best pies in Texas. Come on, I'll show you." The two boys raced into the house, Michael's ordeal seemingly forgotten in the promise of sweets. Hannah watched them go, her heart lightening with each second. "Children are resilient," Nathan observed, coming to stand beside her. "He'll have nightmares for a while, but with love and care, he'll heal." Hannah nodded, turning to look at the cowboy who had saved not just her son, but her as well. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me by that river." Nathan's green eyes were warm in the lantern light. "I'm glad I did," he said simply. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection, an understanding, perhaps the beginning of something more. But it was too soon for Hannah to examine those feelings, too soon after losing Thomas and nearly losing Michael. "Come on," Nathan said after a moment. "Let's go have some of that pie before the boys eat it all." The next few days at the Garrett Ranch fell into a comfortable routine. Michael and Samuel became fast friends, with Samuel proudly showing the younger boy around the ranch, teaching him about the horses and cattle. Hannah helped Mrs. Cooper with the household chores, grateful for the older woman's companionship and wisdom, and Nathan. Nathan was a constant, steady presence. He didn't push or make demands, but he was there, offering quiet support when she needed it, space when she didn't. Hannah found herself watching him when he didn't notice the gentle way he spoke to his son, the confident manner in which he handled his ranch, the rare but wonderful smile that transformed his serious face when something amused him. 5 days after rescuing Michael, Hannah received word from Sheriff Miller that the bandits had been tried and sentenced to hang for the murder of Thomas Evans and the kidnapping of Michael. The execution would take place in a week's time. "Will you go?" Nathan asked that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the boys play in the yard. Mrs. Cooper had retired early with a headache, leaving them alone. Hannah sighed, watching Michael's carefree laughter as he chased Samuel around a tree. "No. I don't need to see them die to know justice has been done, and I don't want Michael anywhere near them ever again." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Have you thought about what you'll do next? About your ranch?" It was a question Hannah had been pondering for days. "I can't go back there," she admitted. "Not to live, too many memories, but I can't sell it either. It was Thomas's dream, something to leave to Michael someday." "What if," Nathan said slowly, "what if you leased it to me?" I'd pay you fair rent, maintain the property, and it would still be yours and Michael's when he's grown. Hannah considered the proposal. It was a practical solution, one that would provide income while allowing her to keep the property in the family. That could work, she acknowledged. But where would Michael and I live? Nathan's eyes met hers, and the intensity she saw there made her breath catch. Here, he said simply, if you wanted to, Nathan. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Hannah, he assured her quickly. You and Michael are welcome to stay as long as you need, with no expectations. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Hannah's chest. Thank you, she said softly. I think that might be best, at least for now. Nathan nodded, his gaze returning to the boys. Samuel's happier than I've seen him in years, he observed. Having Michael here has been good for him. They're good for each other, Hannah agreed. Michael needs a friend after everything he's been through. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the boys' game wound down, their energy finally flagging as twilight deepened into dusk. Time for bed, you two, Nathan called eventually. The boys groaned in unison but trudged obediently toward the house. Michael came to Hannah first, wrapping his arms around her neck. Night, Mama, he murmured, already half asleep on his feet. Good night, my love, Hannah replied, kissing his forehead. Sweet dreams. As the weeks passed, Hannah found herself settling into life at the Garrett Ranch with surprising ease. Mrs. Cooper, who had initially stayed to help Hannah adjust, returned to her own home in town, though she still visited regularly. Hannah took over the household duties, finding comfort in the routine of cooking, cleaning, and caring for the two boys. Nathan was true to his word about leasing her ranch. They rode out together one day to assess the property, and Hannah surprised herself by feeling only a dull ache at the sight of the home she had shared with Thomas. Nathan was respectful, giving her time alone at Thomas's grave while he inspected the cattle and buildings. It's a good piece of land, he told her on the ride back. You and Thomas chose well. He chose it, Hannah corrected, a small smile touching her lips at the memory. I thought it was too remote, but Thomas saw the potential. He was right, as usual. Nathan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. It's good that you can talk about him now without so much pain. Hannah nodded slowly. The pain is still there, but it's different now, less raw. Time helps, Nathan said quietly. It's been 3 years since Catherine died, and I still miss her every day. But I can remember the good times now without feeling like I'm being torn apart. It was the first time Nathan had spoken at length about his late wife, and Hannah found herself hungry for more details. How did you meet her? A smile touched Nathan's lips. At a dance in San Antonio. I was there selling cattle and she was visiting her cousin. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, with this laugh that could light up a room. His expression sobered. We had 10 good years together before the fever took her. I'm sorry, Hannah said sincerely. So am I, Nathan replied, but I'm grateful for the time we had and for Samuel. He's so much like her, sometimes it takes my breath away. Hannah thought of Michael, of the hints of Thomas she saw in his expressions and mannerisms. I understand that. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in memories of their lost spouses. But as the Garrett Ranch came into view, Hannah found her thoughts turning not to the past, but to the future, a future that, increasingly, she couldn't imagine without Nathan and Samuel in it. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came harvest time. The ranch was busier than ever, with cattle to move to winter pastures and provisions to stockpile for the colder months. Hannah threw herself into the work, finding satisfaction in the physical labor and the sense of belonging it gave her. One crisp October evening, Hannah stood by the corral, watching as Nathan worked with a young horse. The setting sun gilded his figure, highlighting the strength in his shoulders as he moved with the animal, his voice a soothing murmur of encouragement. He's good with horses, came a voice from beside her. Hannah turned to find Samuel standing there, his eyes on his father with unmistakable pride. Yes, he is, she agreed. Ma was afraid of horses, Samuel confided, but Pa taught her not to be scared. He said sometimes the things we fear most are the things that can bring us the most joy if we're brave enough to try. Hannah smiled at the boy's earnest face. Your father is a wise man, Samuel nodded solemnly. That's what Ma used to say. He hesitated, kicking at a stone with the toe of his boot. She would have liked you. The simple statement touched Hannah deeply. I think I would have liked her too. Pa likes you, Samuel continued, his childish directness both endearing and slightly alarming. I can tell. Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Samuel, it's okay if you like him back, the boy rushed on. Michael said it would be okay with him too if you did. Hannah's eyes widened. You and Michael have been discussing this, Samuel had the grace to look slightly abashed. We just think you and Pa seem sad sometimes, and maybe you'd be less sad if you were together. Before Hannah could formulate a response to this startling revelation, Nathan approached, leading the young horse back to the corral. What are you two conspiring about? He asked, a smile playing around his mouth. Samuel flashed Hannah a quick, complicit grin. Nothing, Pa, just watching you with the horse. Nathan raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing this innocent explanation, but he didn't press. Well, it's getting dark. Time to head in for supper. As Samuel ran ahead toward the house, Nathan fell into step beside Hannah. He wasn't bothering you, was he? Samuel can be a bit forthright sometimes. Hannah shook her head, still processing the conversation. No, not at all. He's a wonderful boy, Nathan. You've raised him well. I've done my best, Nathan said, a note of uncertainty in his voice that she rarely heard. It's not easy raising a child alone. No, Hannah agreed softly. It isn't. Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her. In the fading light, his features were shadowed, but his eyes were intent on her face. Hannah, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, her heart quickened. Yes, but before Nathan could continue, a shout from the house interrupted them. Pa, Hannah, supper's getting cold. Michael called from the porch. The moment broken, Nathan sighed and then smiled ruefully. We'd better go in before they come looking for us. Hannah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Yes, we should. Whatever Nathan had been about to say remained unsaid as they joined the boys for supper. But throughout the meal, Hannah caught him watching her with an expression that made her pulse race. That night, after the boys were asleep, Hannah sat by the fire in the main room, mending one of Michael's shirts. The house was quiet except for the crackling of the flames and the occasional settling of the logs in the walls. The creak of a floorboard announced Nathan's presence before he spoke. May I join you? Hannah looked up, nodding. Of course. Nathan settled into the chair across from her, a book in his hand, but he didn't open it, instead watching as her needle moved deftly through the fabric. You've been good for this house, he said after a while. For Samuel, for me. Hannah's hands stilled. You've been good for Michael and me too. I don't know what we would have done without you. I've been thinking, Nathan continued, his voice low and serious, about the future, about what happens next. Hannah set aside her mending, giving him her full attention. What do you mean? Nathan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The lease on your ranch is working well. The cattle are thriving, and it makes sense to combine our operations more permanently. Yes, it does, Hannah agreed cautiously, unsure where this was leading. But it's not just about the ranch, Nathan said, his green eyes intent on hers. It's about us, the four of us. We've become a family these past months, haven't we? Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Yes, she whispered, we have. I know it hasn't been long since Thomas died, Nathan acknowledged. And if you need more time, I understand, but I can't help how I feel, Hannah. I love you. The words, so simple and direct, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. Nathan, you don't have to say anything now, he rushed on. I just wanted you to know, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to marry you, to make this family we've built official. Hannah rose from her chair, crossing the small space between them to kneel at his feet. I don't need more time, she said, taking his hands in hers. These past months have taught me that life is too short and too precious to waste. I love you too, Nathan. I love the family we've made together. The joy that spread across Nathan's face was like the sunrise, transforming his features. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. Are you sure? He murmured against her hair. Hannah leaned back to look into his face, her heart full to bursting. I've never been more sure of anything. Yes, Nathan Garrett, I'll marry you. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverential, but it quickly deepened into something more passionate, more hungry. Hannah wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the feelings she'd been holding at bay for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "We should tell the boys," he said with a smile, "though I have a feeling they won't be surprised." Hannah laughed softly. "No, I don't think they will be. Samuel as much as gave me his blessing this afternoon." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "Did he now?" Apparently, he and Michael have been discussing the possibility of us together and decided it would meet with their approval. Nathan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "Well, I'm glad we have their endorsement." They told the boys the next morning over breakfast. As Hannah had predicted, neither seemed surprised. In fact, Samuel let out a whoop of triumph and declared, "Finally." Michael, more reserved, simply asked, "Does this mean Nathan will be my pa now?" Hannah looked to Nathan, who knelt down to the boy's level. "If you'd like me to be," he said seriously. "I could never replace your real father, Michael, but I would be honored to be a father to you, to love you and raise you as my own son." Michael considered this, his young face solemn. "I think Pa would want me to have someone to teach me things," he decided finally. "And I think he'd like you." Nathan's eyes shone suspiciously bright as he pulled the boy into a hug. "Thank you, Michael. That means a great deal to me." Hannah watched them, her heart full. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself and Michael when they'd set out from San Antonio that fateful day. But perhaps it was the life they were meant to have all along. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Fort Stockton. The ceremony was simple but joyous, with Mrs. Cooper, Sheriff Miller, and a handful of Nathan's ranch hands as witnesses. The boys stood proudly beside them, Samuel holding the rings with such careful concentration that Hannah had to fight back a smile. "I, Nathan, take you, Hannah, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Nathan recited, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Hannah repeated the vows, she felt a sense of rightness, of peace. This wasn't a betrayal of Thomas, but a continuation of life, a new chapter in a story that had taken an unexpected turn. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Michael and Samuel ran between the guests, their faces sticky with cake, their eyes bright with excitement. As the evening wore on, Hannah found herself standing apart for a moment, watching the celebration. Nathan approached, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "Happy Mrs. Garrett?" he asked, offering her one of the glasses. The new name still felt strange but not unwelcome. "Very," she replied, accepting the champagne. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought I could be again," Nathan admitted, wrapping an arm around her waist. "When Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find love again, let alone a new family." Hannah leaned against him, content. "Life has a way of surprising us." "Indeed it does," Nathan agreed. "When I found you by the river that day, I never imagined we'd end up here." "I'm glad you found me," Hannah said softly, "though I wish the circumstances had been different." Nathan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Hannah, I'm not glad for the pain you and Michael went through, but I can't help but be grateful for the outcome. You've brought joy back into this house, back into my life, back into Samuel's life." Hannah touched his face gently. "And you've given Michael and me a home when we had nowhere else to go, a family when ours was broken." Their kiss was sweet and full of promise, sealed with the cheers and whistles of their guests. When they broke apart, Hannah saw Michael and Samuel watching them, identical grins on their faces. "I think the boys approve," Nathan chuckled. "I think they do," Hannah agreed with a smile. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the boys had finally been persuaded to go to bed, Hannah and Nathan stood on the porch of their home. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. "Do you think they're watching?" Hannah asked softly, her eyes on the heavens. "Thomas and Catherine," Nathan followed her gaze upward, his arm tightening around her. "I'd like to think so. And I'd like to think they're happy for us, for the boys. Samuel told me once that Michael was playing with his mama in heaven," Hannah remembered. "It seemed cruel at the time when I was so desperate to find him, but now I wonder if there wasn't some truth to it after all." "How so?" Nathan asked. "Maybe it wasn't just a child's way of understanding loss," Hannah suggested. Maybe it was Samuel's way of saying that even though his mother was gone, she wasn't really lost to him. That love doesn't end with death. Nathan considered this, his face thoughtful in the moonlight. I think you might be right, and I think that Catherine and Thomas, wherever they are, would want us to be happy, to love each other and the boys as fiercely as they loved us. I believe they would, Hannah agreed. She turned in his arms to face him, her heart full of gratitude for this man, this life they were building together. I love you, Nathan Garrett. And I love you, Hannah Garrett, he replied, bending to kiss her under the vast Texas sky. Spring came early the following year, bringing with it new life to the Garrett ranch. The cattle had produced a healthy crop of calves, the garden Hannah had planted was beginning to sprout, and the house itself seemed to have taken on a new energy, filled with the sounds of the boys' laughter and the warmth of family. On a particularly fine April day, Hannah sat by the Pecos River, the same spot where Nathan had found her nearly a year before. But this time, she wasn't alone in her grief. Michael and Samuel played nearby, building a dam of stones in the shallow part of the river. Their pants rolled up to their knees despite her warnings about the cold water. Nathan approached from behind, his footsteps soft on the new grass. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her on the blanket she'd spread. Hannah smiled, leaning against his solid strength. "I was thinking about how much has changed since you found me here, how much I've changed." "For the better, I hope," Nathan replied, dropping a kiss on her temple. "Definitely for the better." Hannah took his hand, guiding it to rest on the gentle swell of her abdomen, still barely noticeable beneath her dress. "All of us have changed for the better." Nathan's face lit up with joy as he felt the firmness there, the evidence of their child growing within her. "I still can't believe it," he murmured. "Another child to love." They had discovered the pregnancy just a month prior, and Hannah was still adjusting to the idea herself. After the loss of Thomas and the trauma of nearly losing Michael, this new life represented hope, a future brighter than she could have imagined in her darkest days. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" Nathan asked, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "I don't know," Hannah admitted, "but either way they'll be loved." Nathan nodded, his gaze drifting to the boys. "Samuel and Michael are already planning all the things they'll teach their new sibling. Samuel is convinced it's a brother," Hannah laughed. "And what does Michael think?" "He says he doesn't care, as long as it's not a crying baby like the Johnsons' little one." Nathan's smile turned thoughtful. "He's doing well, isn't he? After everything?" Hannah watched her son, noting the easy way he laughed now, the confidence in his movements. "He is. He still has nightmares sometimes, but they're less frequent. Having Samuel as a brother has been good for him. Having you as a father has been even better." "He makes it easy," Nathan said, genuine affection in his voice. "He's a good boy." "So is Samuel," Hannah replied. "You've raised a fine young man." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boys play. The sun was warm on their faces, the river's gentle murmur a soothing backdrop to the day. "You know," Nathan said eventually, "I've been thinking. This ranch is getting a bit small for all of us, especially with a new baby on the way. What would you think about building a new house? Something bigger, with more rooms for the children?" Hannah considered the idea. "Where would we build it?" "I was thinking on that rise overlooking both properties. It would give us a view of both ranches, and it's a beautiful spot." The location Nathan described was indeed lovely, a gentle hill that caught the first rays of the morning sun and the last golden light of evening. "I'd like that," Hannah said, imagining a home filled with children's laughter, a place where their blended family could grow and thrive. "We could start planning it now, break ground after the baby comes," Nathan suggested. "Make it a home that's truly ours, not just mine that you've moved into." Hannah felt a rush of love for this man who understood so well what she needed, sometimes before she knew herself. "That sounds perfect." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, they called the boys in from their play. Wet and muddy but grinning with the simple joy of childhood, Michael and Samuel raced each other back to the horses, arguing good-naturedly about whose dam design had been superior. Nathan helped Hannah to her feet, his hand lingering on hers. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett, home." The word had taken on new meaning for Hannah in the past year. It was no longer a place, but people: Nathan, with his quiet strength and unwavering love; Samuel, with his solemn wisdom beyond his years; and Michael, her son, who had survived unimaginable trauma and emerged resilient and loving. And now, this new life growing within her, a symbol of their future together. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go home." As they mounted their horses and turned toward the ranch, Hannah felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. She had cried by this river, mourning a life that could no longer be. But from that grief had come healing, and from that healing, a new beginning. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and purple as the Garrett family rode home together, their shadows long on the Texas plains, their hearts full of the promise of tomorrow. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Hannah stood on the porch of the grand house Nathan had built for them on the rise, overlooking their combined ranches. The Garrett Evans Ranch, as it was now known throughout the county, had prospered beyond their wildest dreams, becoming one of the largest and most successful cattle operations in West Texas. But it wasn't the material success that filled Hannah's heart with joy as she watched her family gathered in the yard below. It was the love that bound them together, stronger than the hardships they had endured, more enduring than the grief that had once threatened to consume her. Michael, now 11, was showing his 4-year-old sister, Catherine, how to throw a lasso, while Samuel, 15 and nearly as tall as his father, supervised with the seriousness of an older brother. Little Thomas, just 2, toddled after them all, determined not to be left out despite his unsteady legs. Nathan emerged from the barn, crossing the yard with the easy stride that still made Hannah's heart skip after all these years. He scooped up Thomas, tossing the giggling toddler into the air before settling him on his shoulders. "Careful with your sister, Michael," he called. "Remember, she's still learning." Michael nodded earnestly, adjusting Catherine's small hands on the rope. "Like this, Katie, nice and slow." Hannah smiled at the scene, her hand unconsciously touching her stomach where their 4th child was just beginning to make its presence known. She hadn't told Nathan yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. But watching him with their children now, she knew he would be overjoyed. As if sensing her thoughts, Nathan looked up, his eyes finding hers across the yard. Even after all these years, that look still had the power to make her breath catch. He said something to Samuel, handed Thomas to the older boy, and then headed toward the house, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "Good morning, beautiful," he greeted her, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that was no less passionate for its brevity. "You're up early." Hannah leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I wanted to watch the sunrise, and then I got distracted watching all of you," Nathan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "The children were asking about going to town today. There's a traveling show passing through with acrobats and trained horses. I thought we might all go make a day of it." "That sounds wonderful," Hannah agreed. "The children would love it, and I could use a visit to the mercantile. Mrs. Cooper mentioned they've received some new fabric that I might want for curtains in the nursery." Nathan's hands, which had been resting comfortably on her waist, suddenly stilled. "The nursery," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "Don't you mean Catherine and Thomas's room?" Hannah looked up at him, unable to contain her smile any longer. "No, I mean the nursery, for the new baby, the one that should arrive sometime next spring." For a moment, Nathan simply stared at her, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face. "A baby. We're having another baby," Hannah nodded, laughing at his obvious delight. "Yes, we are. I wasn't completely sure until this morning, but I'm certain now." Nathan let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the yard and caused all 3 children to look up in surprise. Before Hannah could caution him about alarming the little ones, he had lifted her off her feet and was spinning her around on the porch. "Nathan," she protested, laughing. "The children will think you've gone mad. Let them," he replied, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I'm the happiest man in Texas, Hannah Garrett. The happiest man in the world." The children, curious about the commotion, had abandoned their play and were now clustering at the foot of the porch steps, looking up with varying expressions of confusion and amusement. "Pa," Samuel called. "Is everything all right?" Nathan looked down at their brood, his eyes shining with joy. "Everything is wonderful, son. Come up here, all of you. Your mother and I have some news." As the children clambered up the steps, Samuel helping little Thomas, Michael holding Catherine's hand, Hannah felt a swell of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This family, these children, this man who had found her in her darkest hour and brought her back into the light, they were her greatest blessing. "What is it, Mama?" Michael asked, his young face serious with concern. Of all the children, he was still the most sensitive to shifts in mood, a legacy of his early trauma. Hannah knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with her younger children. "How would you all feel about having a new baby brother or sister?" There was a moment of silence as the children processed this information. Then Catherine let out a squeal of excitement. "A baby, like Mrs. Johnson's new baby." "Yes, sweetheart, like that," Hannah confirmed. "Only this baby will be part of our family." "Where is it?" Thomas asked, his brow furrowed in confusion as he looked around, clearly expecting to see a baby somewhere in the vicinity. Hannah laughed, taking the toddler's hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "The baby is in here, growing. It's still very tiny, but in a few months it will be big enough to come out and meet all of you." Thomas's eyes widened with wonder. "Baby and Mama," he repeated, patting her stomach experimentally. Samuel, old enough to understand the implications, grinned at his father. "Congratulations, Pa," he said, sounding so grown-up that Hannah's heart ached a little. The boy she had met by the river was almost a man now. Michael was the last to react, his expression thoughtful. "Will you still have time for us with a new baby?" he asked finally. Hannah reached out, pulling her firstborn into a tight hug. "Oh, Michael, my heart only grows with each child. It doesn't divide. I will always have time for you, always love you just as much as I do right now." Nathan crouched down beside them, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Your mother's right, and you know what? As the oldest after Samuel, you'll have an important job helping with the new baby, just like you help with Catherine and Thomas. The baby will look up to you." This prospect seemed to please Michael, and his serious expression gave way to a small smile. "I could teach it to throw a lasso, like I'm teaching Katie." "Absolutely," Nathan assured him. "Though we might want to wait until the baby can actually walk first." This elicited giggles from all the children, and Hannah felt the last of her concern melt away. They were a family, bound not by blood in all cases, but by love, a love strong enough to weather any storm. Later that day, as promised, they all piled into the wagon and headed into Fort Stockton for the traveling show. The town had grown considerably in the past 5 years, with new businesses sprouting along the main street and fresh paint brightening the older establishments. But it still maintained its frontier charm, a blend of roughness and civilization that Hannah had come to appreciate. As Nathan secured the wagon in front of the mercantile, Hannah noticed Sheriff Miller, older now, his mustache more gray than brown, approaching with a friendly wave. "Afternoon, Garretts," he called. "Quite the brood you've got there, Nathan." Nathan grinned, helping Hannah down from the wagon before turning to lift the younger children. "And getting bigger, Sheriff. Hannah's just told me we've got another one on the way." The sheriff laughed, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. "Well, congratulations to you both. At this rate, you'll need to build an addition to that fine house of yours." Hannah smiled, adjusting Catherine's bonnet. "We might at that. Are you here for the show, Sheriff?" "Just making sure everything stays orderly," the sheriff replied. These traveling shows sometimes attract unsavory elements, but so far it seems a respectable outfit. The children should enjoy it. And enjoy it they did. The afternoon was filled with the delighted gasps and applause of the Garrett children as they watched acrobats perform impossible feats. Horses dance to music, and trained dogs jump through hoops of fire. Hannah, seated beside Nathan with Thomas dozing in her lap, found herself watching her husband and older children as much as the show itself, their joy a greater entertainment than any performance could provide. As the show concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Nathan leaned over to whisper in her ear. "Happy?" It was a question he still asked her occasionally, as if checking to make sure the life they had built together was truly what she wanted, and each time her answer was the same. "Completely," she whispered back, reaching for his hand. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, exhausted from their day of excitement, Hannah and Nathan sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. The air was cool but not cold, perfect for sitting close, sharing warmth. "I've been thinking," Nathan said, his arm around her shoulders. "With another baby coming, maybe it's time I hired more help around the ranch." Samuel's doing a man's work already, and Michael's eager to help, but they're still boys. They should have time to be young. Hannah nodded, her head resting against his chest. "I think that's wise, and perhaps a girl to help in the house. With 4 children, I'll have my hands full." "Consider it done," Nathan agreed. "We can afford it now. The ranch has never been more profitable." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the creaking of the swing and the distant lowing of cattle the only sounds disturbing the peace of the evening. "Do you ever think about that day by the river?" Hannah asked suddenly. "The day we met," Nathan's arm tightened around her. "Often. I thank God every day that Samuel and I decided to take that route home. If we'd gone the other way." "But you didn't," Hannah said softly. "You found me when I thought all was lost. You believed me about Michael when everyone else would have thought me mad with grief. You saved us both." "You saved us too," Nathan countered. "This house was just a building before you came. You made it a home again, Hannah. You brought life back into our lives." Hannah tilted her head to look at him, this man who had become everything to her husband, partner, friend. "I love you, Nathan Garrett, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "And I love you," he replied, bending to kiss her softly. More with each passing day. As they sat there, entwined in each other's arms under the canopy of stars, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun in loss and grief, by a river where she had cried for her lost child. But it had led to this, a love deeper and more enduring than she could have imagined. A family pieced together from broken parts to create something whole and beautiful. The river still flowed, as it had for centuries before them, and would for centuries after. But its waters no longer carried her tears of sorrow. Instead, they reflected the light of the stars above countless points of brightness in the darkness, just as the love she and Nathan shared illuminated the lives they had built together. And as Nathan's hand came to rest protectively over her stomach, where their newest child grew, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, their love a constant, like the river that had brought them together on that fateful day. In the years that followed, the Garrett Evans Ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected names in Texas ranching. The children grew tall and strong under the watchful, loving eyes of their parents. Samuel eventually took over much of the daily management of the ranch, his natural leadership abilities making him a respected figure in the community from a young age. Michael, sensitive and thoughtful, developed a gift for working with the horses, training them with a patience and gentleness that reminded Hannah of Nathan. Catherine, with her mother's golden brown hair and her father's green eyes, grew into a spirited young woman who challenged the conventions of what a rancher's daughter should be, insisting on learning to ride and rope alongside her brothers. Thomas, quiet and studious, showed an aptitude for numbers that Nathan declared would make him the perfect business manager for the ranch someday. And the baby Hannah had been carrying that day on the porch, a girl they named Elizabeth was joined over the years by 2 more siblings, Robert and Sarah. The big house on the hill, once so new and empty, became filled to bursting with love and laughter, arguments and reconciliations. All the messy, beautiful chaos of a large family living a life rich with purpose and connection. Through it all, through the droughts and the abundant years, through illness and health, through the inevitable conflicts and the sweet reconciliations, Hannah and Nathan's love remained the steady center around which their family orbited. Their partnership, forged in grief but sustained by joy, became a model for their children of what marriage could and should be: a union of equals, bound by respect as much as by passion. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the house was finally still, Hannah would find Nathan on the porch, gazing out at the land they had cultivated together. She would sit beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness, and they would speak of the journey that had brought them to this place, this life they had built from the ashes of their separate losses. "Do you ever wonder," she asked him once, many years into their marriage, "what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Nathan turned to her, the lines around his eyes deepened by years of squinting into the Texas sun, but his gaze no less warm, no less loving than it had been on the day he proposed. "I don't believe there was any other possibility," he said simply. "We were meant to find each other, Hannah. Some things are just written in the stars." And as she leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the evening star rise above their land, Hannah knew he was right. Their story, which had begun in sorrow by a river's edge, had transformed into something beautiful, something enduring. A love story not just of passion, but of healing, of two broken hearts finding wholeness together, of a family created from loss but sustained by boundless love. And that, Hannah thought as she gazed up at the vast Texas sky, was the greatest gift of all.